They have no wine. If you've been in ministry as long as I have, you come to expect words like this at a wedding. Perhaps it's not the wine, but it's always something. Someone forgets the marriage license, the flowers don't show up, the groom goes missing. I can remember one such occasion vividly. Everything was going beautifully that day. The bride had processed in with her father. The groom was grinning from ear to ear. The bridesmaids and groomsmen had all managed to make it to their places without even my prompting. I'd moved through the declaration of intentions, the opening prayer, the scripture reading, and had just begun the homily when I look over at the bride who's no longer shedding tears of joy, but rather tears of sadness. As I try to preach and discern what's going on all at the same time, I hear the best man say, "They have no ring." Immediately, my mind starts going over all what I will do. I decide we're going to simply go through all the motions as if we do have the ring. After all, that's how we practiced it, and in the end, it's only symbolic. In fact, we can do it all over again with the ring after the ceremony and go on do that before they go to the reception. Really, it's going to be fine. Really, it's going to be fine. All of a sudden, I see someone slip down the side aisle of the sanctuary and hand something to the bridesmaid on the end. She passes it to the next bridesmaid and to the next bridesmaid until finally, just before I ask the matron of honor for the ring to bless it, the ring appears in her hand. As you can imagine, the bride is back to shedding tears of joy, and all is right with the world again. You see, when it comes to weddings, I've come to expect the unexpected, which is the reason at the rehearsal the night before, I always tell every bride and groom and their families, tomorrow something is not going to go as you planned it. So try not to focus on the thing that goes wrong or goes missing, and pay attention to all that goes right and is present. After all, no matter what happens tomorrow, if you still want to get married, we will get you married. Easier said than done, I realize. And not just at weddings, but in life in general. We tend to spend our time focusing on the wine that runs out rather than how much we enjoyed it going down. Or our mistakes from the past rather than our opportunities in the here and the now. Or what we only wish we could have rather than all that we've already gained. So we can understand Mary's concern, especially knowing it wasn't just about the wine. You see, in the first century, wine wasn't just something that tasted good. It was a sign of God's presence and of God's blessing. If there was one thing you didn't want to run out at a wedding, it was most certainly the wine. It's no wonder then she tells Jesus, if there's anyone who can fix this, surely it's her son, and he does. 200 gallons of water are turned into 200 gallons of wine. Simple as that, nothing to it, problem solved. Which is great for Jesus and this wedding party. It's just that it's not always that simple for us, is it? I mean, we aren't exactly miracle workers. There are times we have to come to terms with reality. Sometimes there isn't enough money. Sometimes we just don't have the time or the energy. Sometimes the wine just runs out. I've already shared with some of you a story that I heard last week at a conference that I was attending. It's about Bruce Edwards, who was a golf caddy for both Tom Watson and Greg Norman, two of the greatest golfers of all time. Just before he died, he was interviewed and asked about the difference between these two phenomenal golfers. Edwards' answer was this: well, it's how they saw the game. He said, let me give you an example. Both players could be on the 17th hole during the last round of a tournament, be one stroke behind and need to make a birdie if they're going to have a chance to win. They could both hit a perfect drive right down the middle of the 17th fairway, but when they approached their ball, only to discover it had come to reside in a divot. Now, if you don't know what a divot is, it's a chunk in the ground where someone else has already hit from. They had two different reactions. Norman would see the ball in the divot and immediately he'd get angry. Start complaining about how unlucky he is. He'd shout and curse and throw his arms up in the air. Eventually, he'd address the ball, hit the shot, but more often than not, he'd go on to lose that golf tournament. Watson, on the other hand, though, would see things differently. He'd kneel down by the ball, give it a long, good look over, sometimes for more than even a minute. Then finally, he'd look up over his shoulder with me and have the biggest grin on his face, and he'd say, "Watch this." Which got me thinking about the miracles Jesus performs. In fact, I went back and read some of them this week, and I couldn't help but notice they were not always so much about what Jesus did as much as they were, at least initially, about what he saw. Instead of 5 loaves and 2 fish, he saw enough to feed 5,000 people. Instead of a heavy stone and a corpse inside, he saw an empty tomb and his friend Lazarus alive and well. Instead of wine running out and the end of a wedding, he saw more wine than anyone could ever possibly drink in a party that was only beginning. I can't help but wonder what might be possible if we saw things differently too. What if we saw challenges as opportunities? What if we saw dead ends as trails just need blazing? What if we saw what little we have as everything we could possibly need and more? Gary was one of the few people I know who saw the world this way. I can remember it was around 2 o'clock in the afternoon that Saturday when he called me. He was the facilities manager at the church I previously served. This time, though, he had a bit of panic in his voice. "The power's out at the church," he said. I responded, "Okay, what happened?" "Well, apparently a transformer's blown in the neighborhood again. The electric company's out working on it, but they just don't know how long it's going to take. Nathan, I'm not sure it's going to be on in time for the wedding." Well, immediately my heart sank. I mean, let's be honest, you can get married without a ring, but you can't get married without power. Curling irons don't work, hair blyers don't do a thing. Of course, the lighting is minimal, not to mention the microphones don't amplify, the organ can't be turned on. If you can imagine being escorted down the center aisle during your wedding in silence, then you can imagine the reason for my feelings of embarrassment and defeat. I said to him, "Well, it sounds like there's nothing we can do." And then I heard Gary have an aha moment on the other end of the line, and it came in the form of one word: generator. I pulled up to the church about 30 minutes later, hoping for a miracle, but the power clearly was still not on. I walked into the sanctuary to find what best could be described as a disappointed bride and an angry groom. I assured them that over the course of the next 2 hours, we'd do everything we could to get the power back on, but that it didn't look good. As I'm doing this, Gary sneaks up behind me and says, "I need your help." Somehow Gary had managed to secure a generator from the local fire department. The plan was to run extension cords from the sound booth up in the balcony, out the window, down the side of the building to the generator below. The concern, of course, was that we'd blow another fuse or make the circumstances even worse, but we needed to try. So he gave me an extension cord and he said, "Go plug it in upstairs." And so I did. And over the course of the next hour, I watched a 60-year-old man do things I never in my wildest dreams could do. It was a combination of sprinting and electrical work and logistics, the likes of which I will never see or experience again. At 5 minutes before 5 p.m., everyone's in their place ready for this wedding to begin. Unfortunately, the electricity still is not on, but we decided we'd make the best of it. If the power didn't come on, we'd still go through with it. I gave them the same assurance I'd given them the night before. "Don't worry, no matter what happens, we'll still get you married," although the words didn't seem to carry the same weight in that moment. I remember looking out in the sanctuary. I walked out, and the groom was behind me along with the best man, and we looked up in the balcony to see if Gary had yet been able to pull off the miracle. Not yet, but wait. Something happened. Just as the doors to the back of the sanctuary opened, all of a sudden I saw the soundboard light up like a Christmas tree. If you've ever seen the movie Christmas Vacation, remember the moment that Clark plugs the lights in on the house and it works? You have a glimpse of the way I felt in this moment. Immediately the bride begins walking into the music she'd chosen years ago, but if I'm honest, all I could hear was the Hallelujah chorus. The microphones powered on, those speaking could be heard, the sanctuary was filled with light, the ceremony was electric. It was on that day I remember thinking to myself, maybe miracles can happen. And maybe God gives us all that we need to make them happen. What if we just need to be more like Gary and see that they're possible? In fact, that's what I noticed most about those miracles I went back and read this week. In almost every instance, it wasn't just Jesus. He had help. The servants drew water and filled the purification jars. The disciples went and secured and then distributed 5 loaves and 2 fish. Even in the story of Lazarus, someone had to roll away that stone. Everyone and everything Jesus needed were right there, in that moment. I don't know if Jesus couldn't do it alone. All I know is that he utilized everything and everyone around him to make it happen. The same is true of any miracle worker if you think about it. Take the one we'll remember this Monday. When everyone saw scarcity, Dr. King saw plenty. Soon others saw it too, and the world has never been the same. Sandy Springs Christian Church, I know these last several years, we've been living on some fumes in some ways. Times of seeing more scarcity than abundance. People we love but are no longer with us. Seeing what we don't have rather than all that we do. But you've proven to yourselves this last year that we have all we need and more. And we don't just have plenty. I think we have the best. And with a combination like that, I promise you, God can make anything possible. So this year, it's time to start dreaming, believing, working with God and one another to achieve whatever it is we believe God is calling us to do and to be. We may not turn water into wine, but at the very least we can keep filling jars, handing out food, rolling away stones. God's counting on it. In fact, I can't help but get the feeling that God's shining a light on Sandy Springs Christian Church in this time and in this place. And he's saying, watch this.